Welcome, women of the world, and I think there are a few men in the room as well, but then again, too few to mention. Sorry, my colleagues haven't dared me to put song lyrics into my introduction. I want you to know, welcome. It is so wonderful to see so many of you here. I hope you're not too uncomfortable, those of you who are standing at the back. Some people have the right idea over there on my right wing, and they are sitting down with their sandwiches cross-legged like we used to do when we were at school, in our pants, waiting to do gym. But do try and make yourself as comfortable as possible, and look for any spare seats and nudge up and budge up so that people can sit down and be comfortable too. It is wonderful to be here. You are about to be in you should put your phones on flight mode, because you're going to be in flight mode because you are going to hear, I promise you, from some extraordinary people today. My name is Shami Chakrabarti, and I'm the director of Liberty, the oldest human rights campaign in this country. We are 80. Yeah, thank you. And Botox was not involved. We have just turned 80, and our job is to campaign for rights and freedoms for everyone. This, our 80th year, is a year when we want more people to join us. And if you saw a little piece of cloth and a safety pin on your seat, that's because our campaign this year is a recruitment campaign. A lot of people know that we're around. A lot of people give us a call when they have a difficult moment, and we want them to do that. But if we are to continue to hold the powerful to account in ways that you're going to hear about, we need people to join us. And so the slogan is "Join us, be heard," and it's not a bad way to sum up what human rights can do for vulnerable people in the most horrific circumstances. They can help them be heard and help them hold the powerful to account for their abuses of power. I am going to introduce two stories really through the lawyers and the people that the lawyers worked with, extraordinary people. I should just say that I'm going to wax lyrical about the lawyers because I'm kind of a recovering lawyer myself. Or perhaps you never recover, perhaps you're only in remission, and the way to do that is one drink at a time. You are going to hear from some remarkable lawyers who are going to tell you about their work and how they used human rights to empower people at the darkest moments of their lives, and then you're going to hear the real stories from the people who found a strength that some of us would, I think, find very difficult to find, but they found it, and they were able to, with the help of their lawyers and human rights principles, find a strength that doesn't just vindicate their lost loved ones, but potentially makes the world a better place for everyone else. I'm the director of Liberty, but I have to warn you that the Sun newspaper also once called me the most dangerous woman in Britain. So be afraid, be extremely afraid. Britain is clearly, as you can see, a very dangerous place. So first of all, I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Emma Norton. I worked out this morning that I've been a lawyer for 20 years. And I've worked with some of the most extraordinary, celebrated lawyers and judges and luminaries and in this country in that time. I've had a remarkably privileged and fortunate life and career. But Emma Norton, my friend and colleague, is literally one of the greats. And they nicknamed her Brockovich in the office. And she hates that, which is why I just said it. And I want Emma to just open up for us how important Human Rights Act principles can be when you're dealing with the worst horrific abuses of power. She has, with her wonderful clients, Sharon and Christina, won a really, really important victory this week, but I'm going to leave Emma to tell that story. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I don't do this kind of talk very often, so I'm quite nervous. One of the things that I've been told is that you have to have 3 key messages. So I had in my mind, what are the 3 things I want you to take away with you at the end of this talk? And the first of my key messages is this. The Human Rights Act is an absolutely vital tool in the armoury of women's rights. What I mean by that is that women can use it to change things. And when things go catastrophically wrong, as they have done, and you will hear today some of those stories, the loved ones of the people who have been lost can use the Human Rights Act to effect real change and ensure that lessons are learned. And that brings me to my second key message, which is in doing that, in enabling the victims of human rights and their loved ones to hold those responsible to account and ensuring lessons are learned, the Human Rights Act actually has the potential to save lives. And my third message is this, and it's very important. The Human Rights Act is at grave risk at the moment. If there's one thing I want to persuade you all of, it's that the Human Rights Act must be saved from repeal. So what is this Human Rights Act? Don't worry, this is not going to be a legal seminar, but I just wanted to give you a really quick summary of what this fantastic bit of legislation is all about. It contains a small number of really fundamental articles which protect the vital parts of what it is to be a human being. These range from the really fundamental stuff like the right to life, the right not to be tortured, to the more general stuff which actually makes being a human being worthwhile. Things like your right to family life, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, conscience and religion. These are the things that make us human beings. But the articles we're going to be concerned about today are obviously the most fundamental ones, without which there's no point in being a human being: your right to life and your right not to be degraded and treated inhumanely. So the Human Rights Act protects your right to life, and that doesn't just mean that the state mustn't kill you. It can require the state to take positive steps to protect you in some circumstances, if you're known to be at risk particularly. And this approach has been used quite successfully to protect people who are known to be at risk of self-harm or suicide. Sarah and I are involved in a case that's going to go to the Supreme Court later on in the year. That's to do with the obligations on the police, the state, to protect victims of domestic violence, and you're going to hear more about that very important aspect of the law later on. The right to life also means that if the state might have been involved in a death, for example, a soldier has died, or somebody in a psychiatric institution has killed themselves, somebody dies in police custody or in prison, there has to be a thorough and independent investigation. Without the Human Rights Act, you wouldn't have that. The purpose of this investigation is to get to the bottom of what went wrong. And the reason why this is so important is so that there can be accountability and so that lessons can be learned. And that's what I mean when I say the Human Rights Act can actually save lives. It's that bit of the Human Rights Act that has enabled the families here today to ensure that there has been accountability and lessons that have been learned. In Sharon and Christina's case involving their sister, which Sharon's going to talk about, we were able to go right back and examine all of the circumstances of their sister's death, including the fact that she'd reported 2 years before she died the fact that she'd been gang raped, and that she'd suffered terrible rape-related bullying, work-related despair, as the coroner eloquently put it. All of that stuff. Without the Human Rights Act, the coroner would have had no power to do that at all. And nobody would have been held to account, and all he would have been able to do is say she hung herself. Nobody would have learned any lessons from that, and nothing would have changed. And the pressure that is now being brought to bear on the Ministry of Defence and the Armed Forces, because of the actions taken by these two tremendous women, it's only been made possible because of the Human Rights Act. So I just wanted to move on quickly and talk about part of the Human Rights Act which protects people, and we're particularly concerned with women today, from inhuman and degrading treatment. And in that context, rape and sexual abuse is self-evidently inhuman and degrading treatment. And the Human Rights Act means that there is an obligation on the state, through the police, to adequately and competently investigate allegations of rape. We all know that many times they fail to do this adequately and competently, and the Human Rights Act can be forced to make them do it. Just within the last fortnight, there has been a resounding victory for a couple of women. These were the victims of the black cab rapist John Warboys. The Warboys is thought to have committed more than 100 drug-assisted, as they're called, drug-assisted rapes and sexual assaults in the back of his cab. Women complained to the police as early as 2003 about him, but it was 2009 before he was caught. And the lawyers were able to show that the police had issued detailed guidance on how to deal with drug-assisted rapes and sexual assaults, but they'd never applied it, they hadn't even looked at it, it'd just been put away in a box. And the officers had never received any training on it either. And one senior officer actually offered the view that the guidance was there just to be held on file so that if somebody sued them, they would have a defence to that. Fat child, so ironic given what happened. And so the guidance was ignored for years and years. And when it finally was put into practice, in this case, Warboys was caught within 8 days. And so the police in that case were found to have violated the human rights of those women, and the women were able to make the case not unreasonably that if they'd applied the law correctly, if they'd acted lawfully, he would have been caught earlier and they wouldn't have been raped. Quite right too. And cases like this are all about upholding the rule of law. And that includes women, of course, who still suffer from a very patchy criminal law response when they complain of rape and sexual assault. And this is, of course, a kind of crime from which they are overwhelmingly and disproportionately likely to be at risk. So moving on just briefly from police responses, I wanted to talk about the military, because that's what Sharon and Chris are going to talk about. In a military rape case that Liberty's been involved in, a young woman reported being raped by another soldier. This isn't their case. She attempted to report it to civilian police, who didn't examine her, didn't interview her, and didn't arrest the suspect, before telling her there was no case, but if she wanted to take it further, she could go and have a word with the military authorities. Using the Human Rights Act, we were able to threaten to take them to the court, and obviously they've rescinded straight away, and there's now hopefully what will be a thorough investigation we'll see. In Sharon and Christina's sister's case, after Anne-Marie's death, obviously there was an awful lot to deal with, but one of the things we uncovered was the truly shocking information about the quality of that original rape investigation. Remember that Anne-Marie was a Royal Military Police officer, and she alleged that she'd been raped by 2 Royal Military Police officers. Well, guess who was tasked with investigating that? It was the Royal Military Police. And it appeared that forensic samples were taken, but a decision was made not to charge the suspects before those results had even got back. One of the arresting officers was good friends with one of the accused. Full medical records of the extent of her injuries were not obtained and weren't factored in. And we've got very serious concerns about the expertise and attitude of the male army prosecutor, which I think Sharon's going to talk a little bit more about. We obviously wrote to the MOD about many things, but one of the things was, you guys really need to reopen this rape investigation. For a year, they kept saying, hold on, we'll look at it, trust us, look at it. They conducted review after review after review, ultimately concluding that there were no further lines of inquiry that needed to be taken because everything was basically fine. Again, we threatened using the Human Rights Act, we said we'd see them in the High Court. This triggered the response we wanted very quickly, and there is now a very active and I think very thorough criminal investigation going on, even though the victim is deceased. So it's obviously a very unusual and incredibly distressing situation for the family, but there's some vindication there about the process. None of this would have been possible. The fresh inquest, the rape investigation, none of it would have been possible without the Human Rights Act, which is the one thing that the principal party in government today wants to repeal. How on earth can we have got to this point where something that is so self-evidently, profoundly and brilliantly good has become so maligned? In my view, the answer is really simple and it's really, really obvious. It's because the Human Rights Act lets ordinary people hold governments to account. And of course the government's not going to like it. That's kind of the point. Just sticking with the military examples for the time being, and you can see how this works. Over the last few years, there's been a tiny, tiny, tiny number of cases brought by families seeking accountability in the military context for terrible failures they say caused the deaths of their sons. These aren't, as some would have you believe, cases where soldiers died on the battlefield and mothers consumed by grief can't cope and have to blame somebody. That is not the situation. These are cases where the MOD is accused of having sent a soldier into battle, into a war zone, with manifestly unsuitable equipment. In that situation, it seems to me that all that mother is saying is, if you send my boy into fight, if you put him into a situation where he might well be killed, all I ask is that you give him a reasonable chance of surviving. You give him the reasonable equipment he needs in order to come out of that as safely as he can. That's all. That's all she's saying. But you wouldn't know that from the toxic debate that has followed from these cases. And the reason is, the bottom line is, the MOD and other government departments just don't want you telling them how to do their job. For that reason, instead of engaging with what seems like a perfectly reasonable point to me, there are dark mutterings of repealing the Human Rights Act or having the MOD fall out of the Human Rights Act altogether so that they're never accountable. And more generally, this sense of outrage you've seen beyond the military, beyond the MOD, and it's across all areas of government at the moment. From Justice Secretary Chris Grayling's attempt to try and stifle the right of individuals to bring judicial review proceedings at all, that's going on at the moment, to Home Secretary Theresa May's, I'll call them egregious misrepresentations of fact. She's lying.
Lies. Can we do the plain English? I know my learned friend is going to do all this. What was it? Egregious what? Sorry.
Egregious misrepresentations of fact.
Thank you.
About what goes on inside the immigration tribunal. I mean, she literally does make it up. Make no mistake, the myths and misrepresentations that go on about the Human Rights Act are nakedly self-serving. They are simply about ensuring that the state is not held to account. They're saying, we do what we want and you don't get to challenge us. So if this succeeds, just in conclusion, if this succeeds, women will suffer particularly. Already bearing the brunt of the economic downturn, already bearing the brunt of the welfare benefits reforms, already at much higher risk of violence and sexual assault simply by virtue of their gender. The removal of the Human Rights Act as a means of bringing direct legal action will land a devastating blow to the state of women's rights in the UK. And I was thinking about women around the world, women in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, India, women who are fighting enormous prejudice and endemic gender-based violence. They might well look to our country and the Human Rights Act as something to which their countries should aspire, something they would be prepared to campaign long and hard for, and no doubt at enormous personal risk and cost to themselves. And I was thinking what a terrible, terrible message it would send to those women abroad, and what terrible consequences it would have for women in the UK if they were able to get away with it.
So now you understand all the things I said about Emma Norton beforehand, and why she's such a brilliant colleague and such a brilliant litigator at Liberty. But we lawyers kind of choose our path. We say, we'd like to go and be lawyers, please, and then some of us go and say, I'd like to go and be a rich lawyer, please, and then some of us say, I want to go and be a human rights lawyer, please, and work very hard and do lots of exams and try and follow that path. But some people do not get a choice about their activism. Some people have no choice at all. Some have greatness thrust upon them in pretty horrific ways. Tomorrow morning I'm going to be talking to our dear friend Doreen Lawrence about the Sunday papers, and she is such a person who had no choice. She was a mum in South London, and the most horrific events take place, and she has no choice. And it's quite common with women activists, I found, that they didn't say when they were little, I want to be Prime Minister and I want to be this, that and the other. They just lived their lives and looked after their families, and then something terrible happened to a family member, and that sense of injustice kind of bubbles up, and they find a strength that perhaps they didn't know they had before. And another such woman, we've mentioned Doreen Lawrence, is Sharon Hardy, who you're about to hear from. And Sharon and Christina had that victory this week with Emma in Coroner's Court in Salisbury, and now they're going to tell us their story.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you and hello. Anne-Marie had always wanted to join the army since her teenage years. She was a confident, happy, kind and caring, intelligent young lady who longed to fulfil her dream of what she thought would be a better life to serve in our armed forces as a Royal Military Police Officer. She carried the 6 core values of the army: courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty and selfless commitment. In 2006, she achieved her dream and became a Royal Military Police Officer. Her first posting was to Northern Ireland. We were aware there may have been some initial bullying here. However, in 2009, she was posted to Sennelager in Germany and was looking forward to the challenge of a busy police unit. Anne-Marie seemed to settle quite well. She was a strong-minded woman, never scared to share her opinion, and she made friends quite easily, and she was always willing to help others. She would always try to see the good in people, and she trusted people quite quickly and took everyone at face value. But on the 20th of November 2009, whilst in her barracks in Germany, she alleged that she'd been raped by 2 colleagues who were also Royal Military Police Officers. She had believed these men to be her friends. Sorry, 1 minute, Emma, can I just have some water? Sorry, I know.
Take your time.
Okay, so she believed these men to be her friends, and the investigation was conducted initially by the Royal Military Police themselves. After a brief investigation, a decision was made by the Service Prosecution Authority that charges should not be brought against these 2 men. Almost immediately after she reported being raped, Anne-Marie began to complain of rape-related bullying at the hands of others in her unit. She became known as the girl who had cried rape and claimed she was being punished for reporting the 2 accused. She was offered very little support, and when she tried to complain about the initial bullying in Germany, which was being instigated by one of the accused men's girlfriends, the complaint was not taken seriously, and Anne-Marie and this particular female soldier continued to be housed in the same accommodation block, living together. Between 2009 and March 2010, Anne-Marie had to stay at the barracks where the alleged rape had happened. During this period in Germany, Anne-Marie was placed on what was known as a Suicide Vulnerability Risk Management Register, as there were fears within her unit that she may harm herself. When she was finally transferred to the UK on a compassionate posting, the coroner described at her inquest this week there was an unforgivable failure to transfer this information to her new unit in the UK. In effect, any care Anne-Marie had received in Germany ended the day she left. On arrival at her new posting, she seemed to settle at first and was trying to stay positive and making plans for the future. Within a year of arriving at her new unit, fellow colleagues from Germany were posted here too, and amongst the gossip-fueled environment, she became known once again as the girl that had cried rape. I'm really sorry, I just need a bit more water. Okay.
Give her something more than water.
I was very hard speaking. Okay. Okay, so once again, she became known as the girl that had cried rape. She then became subject to unacceptable work practices by her chain of command, and evidence we heard at the inquest exposed that bullying here was rife too, and officers within her chain of command were accused of belittling and humiliating her, and as one soldier described, she was made a laughing stock. Her mental health deteriorated in that she became more depressed and troubled, something that she tried hard to keep from her family. She complained to us and others that she was working 85 plus hours a week, and I believe that windows of opportunities by medical staff within the army were missed. 3 weeks before Anne-Marie died, she was asked if she had considered taking her life. She didn't reply. After the breakdown of a brief relationship, she ended up committing suicide in October 2011. The first inquest into her death was held quickly in 2012, and we did not have legal representation. We had hoped that the first coroner would want to examine what the Army had known about Anne-Marie's rape allegation, what support she received, whether she had been bullied and overworked, as statements taken in respect to the first inquest from colleagues highlighted these concerns. To our shock, the matter was fairly cursory, and every time we tried to ask what we thought were important questions, we were shut down by the coroner. He recorded a brief verdict of suicide and asked us to take up any concerns we had with the Army directly. At that point, we approached Liberty. We issued a judicial review in the High Court of the coroner's verdict, and we relied entirely on Article 2 of the Human Rights Act, the right to life. We argued that a full investigation was needed into Anne-Marie's death. For Anne-Marie to take her own life 5 years after joining the Army in the most distressing of circumstances had left my family utterly shocked and devastated. The coroner at her second inquest confirmed what we had always known. She was treated appallingly and let down very badly by the Army. She was never able to recover from what happened to her in Germany on the night that she alleged rape, and was subject to unacceptable work practices. As the coroner described in his verdict, the Army banter had crossed the line to harassment. Victims of sexual violence in the Army need proper support, which the coroner recognised, and we were very pleased with his recommendations. The very least we can hope for now is the armed forces realise there needs to be a better understanding of victims of sexual crime, a better understanding of mental health, and clearer policies on the transfer of medical information between units or regiments. More training, I believe, is needed for the chain of command to be able to recognise bullying and vulnerable soldiers. One senior soldier giving evidence at Anne-Marie's inquest shockingly described in his 23 years service he had never read the Army bullying policy. Finally, without Liberty, this case would never have been possible. We kicked the MOD door down and we exposed their shocking failings. We may have been given an apology from the MOD, but most of all, and more importantly, they were held to account and Anne-Marie got her dignity back. Oh.
I guess that's why they call it sisterhood. So now we're going to hear from another wonderful human rights lawyer. We're going to hear from Sarah Ricca, who is one of the founding partners of a very leading human rights law firm called Deighton Pierce Glynn. I'm not going to recite all her credentials, but I am going to say that she specialises in actions against the police, and she knows a lot about the criminal justice system, including its failings, including in relation to victims of crime and victims of police misconduct. And as before, she's going to open up the story and then introduce her clients, Celia Peachy and Manuel Fernandez.
Thanks very much, Shami, and thanks very much to Women of the World for giving us this opportunity to talk about these issues. It's so important that we get together in forums like this so that you can appreciate what can be done, because half the problem is that people actually don't know what can be done. Your description of being at that first inquest with no lawyers, you get walked over, don't you? I mean, it's the truth of it. And you have these amazing families determined to fight for the vindication of their loved ones, but not knowing what can be done. And so the more you know what can be done, the more you know your rights, the better able you are to fight for your rights, defend them, and stop them being taken away, which is what's going on at the moment. That's the risk that's going on at the moment. So I'm going to talk generally about the particular way in which the state fails women facing domestic violence. I've got my two fantastic people I work with on a case, the case of Maria Stubbings that you might have heard about, that's been in the press. Maria was Celia's mother and Manuel's sister, and she was killed by a man who'd killed before, who'd been convicted and served a sentence for killing a previous partner. and had involvement. Maria had involvement with the police in relation to his continuing violence. The police failed. She was killed. He killed twice. So quite extraordinary set of circumstances, very unusual in my experience. So they're going to tell you the particular story. I'm going to talk a bit about the more general context. So I'm going to start just with facts and figures, which you may be familiar with, but I never cease to be shocked by, even though I run these figures and spout them in letters to get funding and letters to the police and to the courts. Still shock me every time I recite them. 2 women in this country, on average, 2 women die every week from domestic violence, from violence at the hands of a partner or ex-partner. Domestic violence accounts for between 16 and 25% of all recorded crime, a quarter of all recorded crime. It accounts for nearly half of female homicides. 1 incident of domestic violence is reported to the police every minute. At least 750,000, 750,000 children witness domestic violence every year. And children who witness domestic violence are at increased risk of behavioural problems, emotional trauma, mental health difficulties. I mean, one of the many impacts on children. When people do studies on paedophiles, quite often you think, oh, it's because they're abused as children. Actually, interestingly, the statistics for the number of paedophiles who have been abused as children is low, but a very high percentage of them, as I recall it's about 2/3 of them, witness domestic violence. So the abuse that children witness goes on. It leaves a legacy that goes on and harms people in the future. So that's where we are in 2014. We are still, and that 2 women a week has stubbornly stuck there since about the 70s. And policies after policies are announced. Every Home Secretary that comes in, there's some new initiative with their face stuck on it, with their signature. It's all going to change, and it doesn't change. So why doesn't it change? And that's what these cases are about getting to the root of why things don't change. Just one other little statistic, which I always find shocking as well. In the year of 9/11, 2001, more women died in domestic homicides than the number of people that died in 9/11. One of my clients, I'm going to talk a bit about him actually, he's one of the remarkable people that you have the privilege to work with when you do this kind of law. He said their family came to see me the day after. They'd had their first appointment to see me was the day of the bombings in London, the 7/7 bombings. So of course, terrorism, all this. He said, I'll tell you about terrorism. All this money being poured into anti-terrorism. What my sister went through, that was terrorism. How many women are subject to terrorism? Where's the resources being poured into the terrorism against women? And that's absolutely right. So there we are with the statistics. So do we need to get to the bottom of why men behave in this way? Of course we do. Do we need to educate women to spot the signs of abuse before it reaches the stage of violence? Of course we do. But until we eradicate this, until we arrive in the perfect society where this doesn't happen, the state has an obligation to enforce the criminal law. And of course, what we're talking about here, this isn't a fight on a Saturday night, which ends in, outside a pub, someone gets punched, ends up dead. These are cases in which the women are saying, he's done it again, he's hit me again, and the police are doing nothing. These are cases in which the state knows about the risk. And that's what we're talking about. Can we stop a woman ever being killed? No, we probably can't. But can we stop women being killed when they're banging on the door of social services and mental health services and the police and saying, I need help, I need protection? Yes, we can. We can. We're perfectly capable of stopping that. And that's what these cases are about. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about one of the first cases I did in relation to domestic homicide, just to flesh out the issues, and then I'm going to talk about the struggle to hold the police to account, the police in particular, the struggle to hold them to account in relation to the failure to protect. And I'm going to talk about the case of Colette Lynch, just briefly. Colette Lynch was killed on the 3rd of February 2005 by her partner, who had broken into her house. He grabbed their 2-year-old. She ran out. He chased after her. He stabbed her mother, who was staying the night with her because they were so scared of him. Stabbed her, got past her, followed Colette into the street and stabbed her with the 2-year-old still in his arms. And this was a case, nobody could have seen this happening. It was being played out before everybody's eyes, which was what made it so traumatic for the family, and particularly for her brother, to whom she was very, very close. And her brother was ringing the authorities. He rang social services, mental health services, the police. Don't leave it. They come to a crucial stage on the day she's killed, where they're meant to be assessing him. He's got deteriorating mental health over a series of months. Colette repeatedly tries to get him treatment. They keep saying there's nothing wrong with him, including a day where they write down a series of symptoms, including he thinks he can change the weather by changing his clothes. He's hearing voices. 3 times they note the aggression to Colette in the assessment. At the end, they write down no discernible mental illness. So he is meant to be being assessed that day. They talk themselves out of it. Information comes from a previous abusive partner that she's got a bit of a tendency to make up these false allegations. They start deciding, talk themselves out of doing anything, which is what they do. Any excuse not to do anything. So they talk themselves out of doing something. And the GP, or credit to the GP, rings up and says, are you waiting for him to kill someone? And Joseph rings up, the brother, and says, don't leave it till tomorrow, because they've decided to offer him an outpatient's appointment tomorrow. He says, don't leave it till tomorrow. And it's in all the records, tomorrow will be too late. That night, he comes to the house, breaks in, and kills her in the circumstances I've described. These are the failings we're talking about. So if you hear politicians saying, like Emma says, this idea that, look, of course we understand these poor mothers and family members, and they've got to find someone to blame, but, there's no one to blame except, of course, that nasty, evil man, which is what they want you to believe. Actually, that's not true. There are cases in which nobody can be blamed, but this isn't one of them. And how many of them are not one of them? And you're going to hear about another one that is not a case in which no one can be blamed. So here we have these situations. Clearly, people getting things wrong. Presumably, they can be called to account, can't they? Presumably, people are sacked. Presumably, people lose their jobs. Well, surprise, surprise, no, they do not lose their jobs. In Colette's case, we did actually get the first ever public disciplinary hearing of police officers. First of all, the police were disciplined. Shock, amazing horror. Police officers never get disciplined. But they held it in public, which is an unusual power that they have where there is sufficient public concern. And the amazing thing about that was that we sat there hearing how diabolical these officers were. One in particular, one of them just said straight away, I'm sorry. She was so appalling. She didn't really know what she was sorry for. That was the awful thing. And there's a cliche about officers being thick, which I don't subscribe to. I'm afraid she really played to all those prejudices, and she came and said sorry, but when she was asked what she was sorry for, she didn't know what she'd done wrong. So there we are. And another one who refused to say sorry and was absolutely, and these were 2 women, just bear that in mind as well. This is not always men. It's women, and they think, what's she doing with them anyway? Why didn't she leave? They are, almost harsher on these women than the male police officers. Anyway, we see how bad they are. We get to the disciplinary bit. The discipline, we have this whole debate about whether they're going to be sacked, and if they're not going to be sacked, do we walk out? And the family, a big thing, and the press are all there. They come to they find them 5 days' pay. Yeah, that was the sanction. So there we are. That's the message. Carry on not doing your job is the message that the state gets. If it's left to its own devices, if you leave the state to deal with these issues, the state will let them carry on. So how accountability works? Historically, the answer is it hasn't worked. And there are really important claims that have been brought that show this. And it's interesting because, of course, what we're talking about here is the right to equal protection from the law. Women have the right to equal protection from the law. Of course, they don't have that. There is, it is one of the many inequalities that women experience. They do not have equal protection from the law. And the cases that have been brought are about trying to establish that women and other minorities, not that women are a minority, other oppressed groups, other disadvantaged groups do not have equal protection. So there's a famous case brought by a woman who was killed, a famous case brought by Dwayne Brooks, the friend of Stephen Lawrence. So the right of black people to be treated equally when they're victims of crime. And a case of a gay man who suffered abuse from his former partner. And again, the right of gay men to be treated seriously when they're receiving threats of violence and to be treated seriously by the authorities. And those 3 cases couldn't be brought under the Human Rights Act because the Human Rights Act wasn't in force when the relevant acts of which they were complaining occurred. So those claims were brought under, I don't want to bore you with it, but under the law of negligence is the only existing legal hook on which you can hang a claim in those circumstances. And the courts said, as a matter of public policy, we're not going to say you cannot sue the police. I mean, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? How could it possibly be? They say in the public interest. They use that phrase. It's in the public interest that you can't sue the police. The logic being, we can't have those police officers worrying, looking over their shoulders, worrying that they might get told off if they do their job wrong. Why can't we? Isn't that a good thing? Isn't it a good thing that they're worried about doing the right thing? Apparently not. So there we are. That's where the law was. And the law changed. It changed because of the European Convention and the right to life. But before the Human Rights Act, if you wanted to enforce that right, you had to go all the way through, right up. You have to go all the way right up to the Supreme Court and then go to Europe. And the Human Rights Act, you know, the old slogan, bringing human rights home, you can enforce those rights in the UK. Colette Lynch's family would not have had a remedy. They would have had no means of calling those police officers to account after they had their 5 days pay docked. The mental health services that assessed the killer as having no discernible mental illness. Social services who completely missed the obligation to protect Colette's children and take steps in relation to Colette. They'd have no remedy. They'd have been left with nothing. But the Human Rights Act meant they could bring a claim. They brought a claim. They obtained, quite appropriately, substantial compensation for those children so that they could actually... I mean, just a small little thing from that case. When the council offered... Colette's sister had just got a first in anthropology at Manchester University, was set on a... You know, she was off, going to do whatever she was going to do with her life, have a wonderful life. She ended up raising Colette's 3 children, her sister's 3 children. She was offered a council house because she just... graduated, she didn't have the money to buy her own property, so they gave her a council house. The council house was next door to the mother of the police officer, not the stupid one that said sorry but didn't know why, but the one who refused to say sorry. So, you know, they'd be out playing in the garden, and there's this awful, hideous police officer next door chatting with her mum. You know, I mean, they said they never went out in the garden. They couldn't bear to use the garden. You know, just that tiny little thing. They've got the money, they've moved house, they no longer have to live next door, you know, and these things matter. So that's how it works. And I'm just going to read you, just to finish, I had a really moving communication with Joseph, the brother of Colette Lynch, who was really nearly destroyed by what he went through, and by how the state responded, and then the battle we had, because this is back in 2005. This is what you're talking about, right to equal protection from the law. Article 2, you know, domestic homicide, why is there a right? Why is there a right? We didn't take her, we didn't kill her. So it was a struggle every step of the way to get a decent inquest, to get a decent disciplinary outcome. Every step of the way was a struggle. And I was telling him about another domestic homicide case I'd done where it was like the doors had been opened. And actually, they didn't have to bash away. You know, that's what the amazing thing that you do when you fight for your loved ones is you forge a path, you know, for others to follow. And I said that to him, and he said this. He said, "Hi Sarah, I was pondering your words earlier. I spoke to him this morning, checked he didn't mind me reading this out. And something came to mind. You used the word forged, and it really struck a chord with me. Joseph was a potter, so he knows a lot about materials, okay? It occurred to me that the word forged is a very appropriate one, since I do feel like a formless mass of iron that's been repeatedly heated in searing red-hot coals, beaten with a hammer, bet you'll relate to this, you two?
Yes.
Beaten with a hammer, plunged into water again and again and again. This process, as I understand it, not only changes the form of the raw pieces of iron, but dramatically alters the crystalline structure of the metal. until it emerges, transformed by the processes that have shaped it, a new, useful, and recognisably human artefact. Finally, the resulting object's left for some time to cool down before handling by humans is possible. I can really relate to these metaphors. For years, I felt raw, formless, useless, not fully human, as though I'd been heated or inflamed to an unbearable degree to my core, beaten mercilessly, then plunged into cool water time and again. The cooling off period came after the proceedings ended just over a year ago. And for the first time since Colette's tragic death, nearly 9 years on, I finally feel whole again, and then I can begin to rebuild my life. And that's what the Lord, it did for him. He has come through it. It's a hideous struggle. It's not one to be recommended. I've told you about this. It's hideous, but it is necessary, and you come out the other end of it, and you forge a path for others to follow. And you are part of this. What can you do? Well, you can do what you can to defend the Human Rights Act. Be aware of the threat that's posed by the Tory government's determination to repeal it. You can support the call for a public inquiry. We are calling for a public inquiry. I mean, we need a Stephen Lawrence-style inquiry into how the police fail women and the other authorities. We need to get to why is it so difficult? Why do the policies lie gathering dust? Why again and again do we go, oh, that's why we got it wrong? Okay, we'll do it different next time. Next time, it's exactly the same. It's got to have that level of public scrutiny. So support the call for a public inquiry. And, just be conscious and spread the word that you can fight for police accountability in this area, and we can get victories for people, and we can begin to change things. But if we don't fight for the rights that we win, we will lose them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And now we're going to hear from Celia first, if that's so. Celia Peachy, who was briefly introduced before by her solicitor. Follow that. No, you'll be fine, mate.
Okay. Well, follow that. Well, you're going to have to bear with me. As introduced, I'm the daughter of Maria Stubbings, who was callously murdered by a man called Mark Chivers, who had murdered before. And she was murdered the week before Christmas. So as I said, bear with me because I'm going to go through the catalogue of errors that my mum had to endure. So on the 16th of July 2008, he was arrested and put on remand for seriously assaulting my mum. 18th of July, the police installed a panic alarm in my mum's home following his assault, his arrest for the assault. 10th of September, Essex Police, for some reason which has never been explained, disabled the panic alarm in my mum's home prior to the release for the assault, despite the fact that she was very high risk. So they disarm a panic alarm on the release of a convicted murderer. After his release on the 13th of October 2008, the police failed to place any restrictions on Chivers' movements and failed to provide any protection for my mum, even though they knew he was a previously convicted murderer in Germany in 1992 in very similar circumstances. The police also failed to assess the risk she was in, provide any protection or help her plan how to stay safe. 3rd of December, my mum's friend, Claire Oliver, contacted the police to express her concern that Chivers may have assaulted my mum yet again. No action is taken in response to her call, and the IPCC subsequently formally upheld Miss Oliver's complaint against the police in relation to their inaction. Mum called Essex Police to say Chivers was hanging around her house and had stolen items from her handbag. She was scared for her life. Her call initially graded as grade 1, but subsequently got downgraded to grade 2. The call handler also failed to record the correct address, which meant that Mum's alerts attached to her address were not accessed. December the 11th, Mum then contacts the police, again, afraid for her safety. She reports that Chivers is hanging around her house yet again and asks about a restraining order. She also reports her suspicion that he had recently burgled her house. The following day, a police officer called Mum to say that they had found Chivers with my little brother sitting in the front here, in my mum's car. She was really upset. They drove him home and Mum told them again that she'd suspected that her house had been burgled. That same day, Mum contacted the police again, twice. 13th of December, Essex Police telephoned my mum. Her manner on the phone raises concerns and the officer suspects that Chivers might be with her. So they attend her house to check on her welfare. Mum doesn't let them in. She's scared. So ironically, the officers ask her to sign their notebook to say that she doesn't want to proceed with the matter, even though they believe Chivers might be in the house at the same time. Then they close the case. This was the last time the police saw her alive. December 17th. A police officer fails to attend the house to check on Mum after being instructed to do so. An officer from the domestic violence unit becomes concerned when she sees Mum's calls about Chivers on the police log. Officers finally attend her home a day later on the 18th of December. Chivers, the convicted murderer, and the assaulter, answers the door and told the police that Mum was away, even though the police were there specifically because of the fears of the domestic violence unit officer. They took no steps against him and didn't even search the property. All they did was leave a calling card and ask Chivers, the murderer, to inform my mum, who's missing, that they had called, leaving him free rein to do exactly as he wished. It still dumbfounds me to this day that the police took a convicted murderer's word on the doorstep of a missing victim's house. 19th of December. Police attend Mum's house again, this time with explicit instructions to arrest Chivers and search the property. They searched the property and found Mum's body in the downstairs bathroom just feet from the front door. She'd been strangled with a dog lead. The police finally arrest Chivers. My mum is not a statistic. She was a real, live, beautiful person. She had a right to protection, and she was denied that basic human right. I truly believe that she would be alive today if the police had done their jobs properly. The police also took no action when they found my little brother alone in the house with Chivers, as he was following her around to make sure that he didn't discover her body. We're truly blessed that he's alive today. I could understand had the police just made one mistake. But this catalogue of errors is not only farcical, it's tragic, and it's utterly unbelievable. Unfortunately, my mother's case is not an isolated incident. But these errors are being consistently repeated. Where are the values, such as accountability and professionalism? listening and caring. Currently, the behaviour of the police is totally unacceptable, and this is due to the lack of training. Also, it's evident that many individual members of the police force lack any form of compassion. This affects everybody. No one is immune. Everybody has a mother. And many have aunts, sisters, and daughters. We need a public inquiry to find out why this keeps happening and what steps need to be taken in order to improve the system. It starts in our homes, it starts with us, and it starts now. Please sign our petition, refuge.org.uk/public inquiry. Take a moment and make a difference. A moment taken now could save a life of someone that you love. Our faith is our fortune, and together we can change the world.
Yes, you can. I really do believe you can, Celia. I really do believe you can change the world. If you turn to your right just for a moment and look out that window, you'll see that at this moment the sun is shining and the sky is blue, and your mother's very proud of you.
Thank you very much.
You're not going to tell me to follow that, are you?
You can if you'd like.
I'm seriously outnumbered. Preparing for speaking with you all today was quite a challenge because we wanted to make an impact and not make it just a personal impact. We want to share what a lot of the people on this panel have shared with you already, and that we are in charge of our own destinies and we have to care to make some change. Before I start saying anything, I have to literally just say how honoured I am to be the only guy in amongst some very brave women who just are amazingly inspiring. I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter. Sister, I beg your pardon. See, I'm a man. I actually did serve in the army as well, so I can attest to some of what your poor sister may have gone through. And I'm just honoured to be with all of you. You know, Liberty, what you're doing is fantastic. And if we do relinquish the Human Rights Act, we're toast. We're toast, because even with it, you are only getting probably less than a percentage of what really goes on that we actually hear about. A percentage. I'm also honoured to be next to Sarah, who actually, I'm very fortunate in many ways. I've always been inspired by women. I'll tell you why in a moment, but you know, Sarah is the most amazing person I've ever come across. To battle the battle that we are fighting, winning, and we've won, and we will win. Even if I die in the process, I'll come back in spirit and carry on fighting, because it's my sister, and it's her name, and it's all of our futures. Yeah, we're all going to have children, we've all got brothers, we've all got sisters. Those are the very people that should be protecting us, ironically. So I haven't really got a great deal that I can say. Certainly can't compete with this bunch of people. It's just, but I am going to say this: everything I am and everything I've owe my success to is because of two women. And I'm only here in person because my mother braved death to give birth to me, despite advice to abort. There was a lot of complications. I won't bore you with that. Sometimes I wonder if it was luck or not coming through. And the other one was my sister. She, to me, was one of the most beautiful people I've ever encountered. She just had an amazingly caring, loving way about her. She didn't judge you on looks, money, nothing. She was just a pure spirit. And when I left the army, and all I'd been trained to do is kill, unfortunately I didn't kill anyone, which I'm really grateful for. I didn't really know where to go with my life. And to me, she was the most powerful, caring, shining light. And I live every single day with those ethics at my core. To me, women represent the givers of life and love. And I would say that I'm outnumbered, but I genuinely mean it. I mean, you're powerful creatures, and I don't know if that's politically correct saying creatures, but I don't know what else to say.
You're all right. You're okay.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably know there was a song that the women are more deadly than the male.
I'm the most dangerous woman in Britain, mate.
It's no coincidence I'm sitting at the very far right. So, in 2008, when I had to hear what happened to my sister, I can't even begin to tell you the journey that one goes through. There's just, you couldn't write a book and bore the living daylights out of everybody trying to tell them the roller coaster of emotions that you go through. And Celia has articulately and painfully just given you a snippet of the errors. If you want to be kind, you can call them errors. Personally, when I look at that, I have to try and look at my sister's case abstractly. I've got to try and detach from the emotions to serve justice, not just for my sister, but for everybody else that's still living, and for the fact that we need to make sure we have a safer future for everybody else. I struggle with understanding any logic, and you could say that the police and some of the agencies that are supposed to protect us recruit directly from amoeba-like creatures. You could say that, but that would be unfair to those that do serve and try and protect.
And indeed to amoeba.
And indeed to an amoeba. But I did think that, good point, I did think when we embarked on this journey that, wow, my sister's case is just so outlandish. If ever there was a cause for change, this has got to be it. This has got to be it. Damn sure I'm going to make sure that we're going to make sure that we do something in her name to protect the living. And lo and behold, where are we now? 2014. We're contemplating getting rid of the Human Rights Act. My God. And we are still hearing statistics, 2 women a week. My God, where are the policemen? Are they in McDonald's every day? I don't understand. And having served in the military and understanding about accountability and that the person next to you is your brother, I would struggle to put my head on a pillow at night if I knew that the job I did was so laissez-faire against probably defenceless children and women. How on earth can you wake up in the morning with any clear conscience? Who are they? Who are these people? Do they not have, brothers and sisters, mothers, daughters? Are they immune? They're not. They're perpetuating a cycle that they'll eventually, hopefully not, but could become victim of themselves. All I can say is that today, everything I do, and I do with my niece and nephew, who are super brave and amazing, they're my sister's children. So now they're my children, which is kind of ironic because they've been trained. It's amazing. You do leave towels all over the place, but I still love you. They're a constant reminder of why I endure being outnumbered, being outspoken, and sitting up here fighting for what I believe is right. And they have so much courage and love and care to actually represent not just my sister, their mother, but you, all of you, and everybody else that is out there. I'm beginning to waffle, so I'm going to close and say that if we don't take a moment to actually do something to encourage change, and we don't encourage others to change, then we're responsible for the very mess that we sit in today. Personally, there's not a lot you can take from me to change my attitude towards change, and I urge you to reach inside yourselves and sign the petition for a public inquiry. I personally am a little bit ashamed to be here as the only male, actually. And
Don't
there's a
be
lot of
ashamed.
great men out there.
Don't be ashamed, you're right.
I know.
Calling all great men.
And I know there's a lot out there, and unfortunately they seem to be the perpetrators in most cases against women, but you know, we have to take responsibility to change our world, as Celia said, and as all these people are doing on this panel, amazing, and all of you for being here. So I'm glad I didn't cry. I thought I was going to spend the whole time crying.
Which is very manly, by the way, to cry.
Yeah, I guess so.
Not all the
thank
time.
you. Thank you. Well, he said it, outspoken, outnumbered, but fighting for change. I thought that was rather beautiful.
Thank you.
And now we have about another 20 minutes together for a few points and questions and discussion. But remember that my friends up here on the panel have been through the ringer, so be kind and be gentle, including with each other after all of that. I'm going to suggest that I take, because I suspect there'll be lots that people want to say and ask about, I'm going to try and pack as many people in as possible. There are microphones. I'm going to take groups of 3. If you have a point rather than a question, here's a trick that I picked up in Wow Sydney, actually, because the Australians have this trick that you can turn a point into a question just by lifting your voice at the end. The French sometimes do it too. No, but seriously, if you want to make a point rather than ask a question, that's fine, but just keep it tight so that we can get a few more in. I'm going to do groups of 3. Have we got more than one microphone? How many have we got? Fantastic. So we've got the 2 sides of the room. Fantastic. So I've got somebody over there and somebody at the back over there as the first 2, and then I'll find a third, and then I'll come to my panel. But nice and tight and crisp, please. Please.
I'm being very brave. I just want to point that out before I start. I'm so sympathetic to what you've got to say, and I'm so sorry to hear of your troubles. And this is why I tell you that I actually work for the police, which is why I'm being very brave. Can I tell you that they're not all like that? That we have really, really good people who work really hard. And can I leave you with something positive? I'm running, I'm not an officer, I'm a staff. I'm running a program for domestic abuse victims called Springboard. My force is now sponsoring me to do that, looking at how we can be proactive to help women stay out of the abuse cycle and move forward. We are working on it.
Thank you. Which force is that? Out of
That's
interest?
Thames Valley.
Thames Valley. Well, you have a wonderful woman chief constable in Thames Valley. It may not be a coincidence, Sarah Thornton.
No, she's very switched on about.
I'm very glad.
violence.
Thank you for that, and don't feel too brave. You're amongst friends here. Thank you. And then I have my friend right at the back there, please.
Hi, thank you very much for that. It's absolutely extraordinary. I thought it's very interesting what you were saying about a quarter of all violence reported is domestic, and I agree that there should be an inquiry into that. But much of the problems with the human rights issue is around the press and the fact that actually lots of them are quite negative towards the Human Rights Act, and I think that perpetuates politicians' attitudes against it in some way. How do you think we can get the press on board?
Okay, and then a third, and then I'll go to the panel. You have a point. Okay, so I'll have a mic here. There's a lady here who has a point. But she's going to. But she knows she has a point. She just needs a microphone to go with her point, and then we'll be in business. And thanks, Amanda. Just here. Nice crisp point.
I'm a midwife, and I'm speaking as a health professional in this. When we were in the booking clinic, in the antenatal booking clinic, it is very, very difficult to elicit from the women about domestic violence. They always want their partners with them when you're taking a history. And it is really, really hard for us as midwives to help them. Although you know there is something there, but until they tell you about it, you can't document it. Okay. And it is, I just wonder how, as health professionals, especially as midwives, because we get in, we see these women very early.
That's very important. Thank you.
And we would like to know how to assist.
Thank you for that. So I've got really two quite interesting points, I think, that I'm going to ask the panel, anybody that wants to respond. The first was that classic, how do we get the press to stop monstering human rights? I wish I knew I'm not going to answer because I'm just chairing, thank goodness. But there are people on here who will have some... And in fact, I might, if you'll forgive me, Sharon, because your experience of the media is relatively recent and you've been thrown right in it and you've done it all, haven't you? You and Christine have done Daybreak and before all of this, you will have been, from the outside, aware of, human rights is just for terrorists and foreigners and prisoners.
But they're not, and you proved that.
But how do you think we get this across to the popular media?
I think in terms of domestic violence, there needs to be a better understanding of it, and it's just publicity, more publicity, and you need people that are going to support you.
We need you, don't we, mate? We've got
job roles.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. You're on. Sarah, do you want to say? Sarah, see.
I think that the word violence is quite misleading as well, in the way that you think of physical abuse, where really it's the mental and emotional erosion of someone over time. And I think that we need to be really clear about our definitions of words, because to know if we're speaking on the same level and wavelength about what one word means to another, because it's not, shouldn't even get to physical violence. No. That emotional and mental erosion of someone's confidence is unacceptable today. We're wiser than that. We're in the 21st century, so that's where I stand with that.
Sarah, I thought that's it. It's interesting you used the word terrorism in the context of a client who wrote to you and said, my sister experienced terrorism. And I'm thinking of Nigella Lawson recently talking about intimate terrorism, which was very, very powerful, very, very powerful phrase.
It starts in the homes and it spreads from there.
But Shami, can I just say as well, actually, I think children need educating at school about domestic violence, because if they're seeing it in the home, they could potentially grow up and that's how they're going to behave in their relationships. So they need a better understanding it in the schools.
Healthy relationship education is definitely a must today.
What about the second point? What about the second point from our friend the midwife, who talked about women's difficulty with even speaking away from their partners, and crossing that Rubicon of actually speaking up when you're still in that relationship? And what do you think about that?
I've got a comment, and thank you for being brave. You weren't brave, and not all police are bad. We know that. I do think that there are a chain of events that actually leads to the disclosure of the problem, I think. If you are, as Celia said, under any form of duress or pressure from what can't be described anything less than a cowardly, infringement of someone's right to live normally, then if those people that are actually suffering that form of abuse, mental or physical, don't feel that there is a safety net for them, when and how are they going to speak to any of the other support agencies? I've been very unfortunate to have countless friends and people that this problem has been all too close to them, and I've found myself in a situation with, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And it gets turned back on the victims all the time. And okay, in some cases maybe it is the victim, it may well be, but in a lot of cases these people are being suppressed and controlled and manipulated, and they are scared. And wouldn't you be? Look at my sister's case. She did the 999 call. What did she get? Nothing. 14 big errors and a laissez-faire approach to it. So, no, of course.
Sarah, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to say that certainly the terrible thing is that I'm involved when things have gone horribly wrong. But the importance of things like midwife notes, you'd be amazed, I had a case involving a failure of the local authority to protect a child that was exposed to domestic violence, and the midwife had every now and then just written to the GP and said, I'm a bit worried about this family. And it was enormously helpful that the professionals that were involved were recording these things, so that it wasn't just, I remember this happening, and they could challenge the victim's account. So the role of professionals and the integrity of the professionals involved is vital. I appreciate how difficult it must be. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I guess it'd be great for the National Midwifery Council to talk about that issue and see if there's a way of advice they can give to practitioners. But I think it's absolutely vital, the role that the relevant professionals play in recording evidence that they see and doing what they can to pass that on. It's the old sharing information, which comes up in all these cases, the failure to share information. Just a quick point on the press. I mean, it is a really, really good point, because, like Emma said, the Human Rights Act mainly gets a diabolical press. The funny thing is, of course, these cases are one of the few cases I ever get where I might possibly get a favourable coverage in the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail, they're into these, they love these cases.
They don't like mentioning the Human Rights Act, though.
Exactly. They love mentioning nasty criminals, let's have a picture of them, and they love all that, the sort of titillation. And they do write quite extensive articles about how the state fails, but they helpfully leave out the bit about how the role the Human Rights Act plays, because you say it's not terrorism or
I think one of the key reasons for that is because one of the other articles of the Human Rights Act that we didn't talk about today is the right to privacy. You have a right to privacy, so some might say rather cynically that the press don't have a particular interest in encouraging anything that gives people the right to promote that and demand it. So there is a real
and all that.
degree of cynicism in it. But can I just say on spotting the signs, because the point the midwife made, I think that was something that really came out with Anne-Marie's case, was that after she'd reported being gang raped, when you're looking back at the records and you're looking back at what she was saying and what she was visibly being described as presenting, it was absolutely clear she was suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what we think. We got an expert, she agreed with us. And this was the army. They are supposed to be really well trained at spotting that. And we actually had a witness who had to pause to think before he answered the question whether he thought rape could be traumatic. He sort of paused and then our barrister had to lead him. I suppose, he had to pause and think. And he was clearly thinking, there's post-traumatic stress disorder when you come back from, Afghanistan and blah, blah, blah. And then there's that sort of, rapey sort of stuff. And it was completely different. There was no sense that they were looking for the same sort of signs or anything. So one of the things we're hoping is going to come out of this, there'll be better training for that sort of thing.
I'm going to take one more group of points/questions, and then we're going to let these people rest. So who wants to say something? I've got some, you could have a question, you can have whatever, a comment, you can have whatever you like, keep it short. And then we've got one over there, somebody over there, and do I have another? I've got another one. Oh, of course. How are you? Oh, it's good. That was a good night. Yeah. Okay. So, so who's first? Okay, please.
So I work in child protection and vulnerable adult areas, and understand for myself what it means to have the moral imperative. So it's absolutely my duty to speak up about issues that might mean someone is harmed. Where does that stand for the rest of the sort of general public, and how can we bring that more to the fore?
Okay. Thank you. And then over here, please. So I'm really making you run, aren't I, Amanda? But you've got good, sensible shoes for it.
Firstly, your strength of all of you is just completely inspiring. As you've said, we're living in a time of huge threats both to the Human Rights Act and to legal aid. I work at Garden Court Chambers, we're human rights barristers' chambers. How do you think the cuts to legal aid, or the cuts more generally, will affect fights like this one to hold the state to account and also to protect victims of domestic violence?
Thank you. And then we had a final point. Now remind me, is it Rosemary? No, it's... Sorry? Your name's Rosemary?
Mandy.
Mandy. It was only last weekend.
Rosemary by any
last
other
weekend
name.
at the Tate. No, we should be plugging the Tate at the South Bank. Shh.
I really just wanted to go back to something Emma said right at the beginning about how, the current government are kind of trying to take away and get rid of, repeal the Human Rights Act. While that's also ideologically driven, I don't think we should neglect to remember that it's also about economics, as witnessed by the decision yesterday to scrap the Independent Living Fund, which means that a lot of disabled people, particularly disabled women, will be left without the resources and the rights to a proper life. And also, I suspect, the army are willing to spend a lot of money on new weapons, selling and the buying thereof. They're probably less willing and less able to spend the money on the people on the ground, ensuring that they have the equipment, the safe equipment to do their jobs properly.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you.
To also support those who are going through PTSD as well, and also the resources within the police forces that go towards supporting victims of domestic violence. So it's often as well about resources, and we can't let them get away with that either.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you. Right. Whoever wants to, I'm going to let everybody that wants to respond to those points and make your final flourish as well, and say just whatever you want to say, and then you get to have a rest, because that was really quite extraordinary. Who wants to go? I'm going to make.
Should the lawyers go first?
Yeah,
and
the
then
lawyers
we can
go
end
first. The lawyers
I think
always.
If you ask Sarah and I about legal aid, you'll be here till the cows come home. It's just absolutely devastating. It's just appalling what this government has done. Housing, welfare benefits, family, you name it. It's basically gone. And many of us are very, very concerned
we
that
need
it's
to
never
get
going
the
to come
Labour
back.
opposition to make a few promises too. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes.
Because I was at a rally yesterday, and there was the shadow Lord Chancellor was there again, telling jokes about Chris Grayling and what a bastard he is. But when he was asked, "Will you reverse this policy?" I suddenly couldn't hear. Suddenly there was all. So I do think that's democracy. That's the way it works. We need to nail down the politicians, because it's hard enough when they make a promise. It's harder still when they don't even make the promise. So that's something we could think about. Who wants to?
Either nail down the politicians or just nail them up.
Now.
And
got my vote.
I think we also absolutely whatever we can do, whatever allies we can find in the fight to defend legal aid, absolutely. But the Labour Party were absolute party in government, offered to be attacked, weren't they? So it's a no. There's no quick answer, is there? That's the trouble with it. And it does rest with all of us fighting to defend all this. And for public funding, if it didn't exist, we've just had our first victory in the long fight, which is we've won the right to have an inquest. Which is absolutely crucial. Yes, I went yay. Thank you for that. Yay.
Oh, no, we can do better than that.
We only won that because we had public funding. You can't run these cases. Nobody could afford to pay for these privately. You have to have public funding, and the rights are only as good as the structure that's there to enforce them. And that's underpinned by, and it's the state's obligation to investigate itself, to address its failings, and it's the state's obligations to provide whatever funding is necessary to allow that to happen. Okay. So it's absolutely defend the Human Rights Act and defend legal aid.
Yeah.
And join Liberty. Please join us, be heard. You've been heard very well. Quick word from Manuel and then Celia, please.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute crucial question. The journey as somebody that's got to go through the legal process is arduous, complex, and just an evil process to go through. And the most intelligent people will struggle with it. You need some great minds, and you seem to encounter a ton of hurdles that I think they've been designed that way personally, but nonetheless, give them the benefit of the doubt. Without public funding, it is impossible. Unless suddenly you've just built a multi-billion-pound company and fund it that way. There's just no way. So my worry is if we don't vote for protecting those two things, again, we're toast, and I'm going to build a spaceship and find another planet to live on.
Celia.
Well, I just want to thank Sarah, really, because as Mino said, I call him Mino. Some of these papers, I have actually a panic attack when I respond to them. I can't understand or fathom them, and I find them very, disempowering, and I have to summon all the energy I have in me to fight for my mum's name to the end, because it seems like the system is designed to make people give up, and we can't give up. We cannot. And I was read recently, team, together everybody achieves more. And so sign the petition, stand up for your rights, and let's wake up. We have to. We can't turn a blind eye anymore. We can't.
Thank you. Christina, you've been sitting there.
Finally, I get to say something. Yeah. Can I just say, when you said a moment ago, when you heard that you can actually go for your first inquest and that people are going to hear, you said yay. Well, that's how we felt as a family when we finally were allowed to have the second inquest. But thanks to Liberty and Emma Norton, who I cannot express how grateful we are. When you get to the stage where we actually completed our, I'm nervous now, sorry. When we actually completed our inquest the other day and we got all the answers that we finally wanted, my God, it wasn't yay, I cannot explain the feeling it actually was. And can I also say, your story, it brought quite a few tears and a lot of memories back, to what we've been through as a family. And can I just say, I think your mother would be so proud the way you've just got up there and you've just done that.
Thank you.
Okay. Don't give up.
Well, I don't know about you. I found that quite a couple of hours, and it won't be over for a few more hours or days or years. But I don't feel sad. I feel inspired, and I hope you do too. There were some sad moments. We're going to have a look in the ladies at what we're doing with the black rings, but even bigger bags than usual. But I feel inspired by these amazing people here, and I'm a grumpy middle-aged woman and I do it for a living, and there's so much I am. I don't know. Am I a professional teenager or am I a grumpy middle-aged woman? I don't know. The government behaves outrageously, and I go, I hate you. That's not fair. But actually, sometimes we can do more than that. We can come together and we can do more than that. We can use these tools. And I do urge you, of course I do, to join Liberty. I do urge you to sign this petition that we've all been urged to sign. I promise you that if you join Liberty and you join us, we will save the Human Rights Act. That's a promise. That's a promise. And before you go and enjoy what's left of the sunshine and the blue sky and the inspiration that we've all shared together, I want you to give one. I don't want you to clap anymore. You've done enough crying. You've done enough clapping. I want you to join me on your feet for the wonderful people that we've heard from today.